So most of my audios are ideologically and politically neutral, and that's how they will continue to be. And this audio is also going to be ideologically neutral, but a lot of people are going to see it as being ideologically non-neutral. But I would like you just to take it for what it is, which is a dispassionate analysis of a political situation. So everybody knows, or people know, it is known, that 60 years ago, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were not bitterly at odds with each other. They had their differences, obviously, otherwise there wouldn't have been two parties, there would have just been one party. But they functioned in more or less the way they're supposed to function. The Democratic Party looked after the interests of the little guy. The Republican Party had its eye on the big financial picture. And not that they were wonderful parties necessarily, they were not, but in their way, they worked individually and they also worked collectively. And it was fairly clean burning. Internal politics were, so to my very limited knowledge, at least more or less okay, but certainly relations between the parties were relatively functional. And that's no longer how it is now. Now, what has happened? And here's the part where a lot of people are going to read meanings into what I'm saying that are not there. Well, here is what happened, okay? Let's look at the Republican Party right now. What exactly is the Republican Party? Is it the party of economic common sense? No, it is not. It is not. The Republican Party is better than the Democratic Party in that respect, but it is not an economically or financially particularly intelligent party. It used to be passable in those respects, but it is no longer that. It's better than the Democratic Party, I will stress, but it does not serve the interests of medium-sized businesses, small businesses. It does not serve. It serves the interests of businesses only in an extremely selective way, and only in a way that certainly do not redound to the long-term or even the medium-term or even the short-term benefit of the country. And so, is it what exactly does it stand for? Well, here is what the Republican Party is actually about. Okay, so this country was a completely white country. I mean, there were black people, but they were completely disenfranchised. They didn't really have any meaningful role in the political process until the mid-60s. So back in the 50s, the parties were both parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were both white parties. They were not anti-black parties, or they were not racial parties, but there was not really anyone else around. I mean, again, there were black people, but they were so disenfranchised that neither party represented them, or had neither party either represented them or represented some kind of opposition to them, just because they were not really part of the picture in any relevant sense. Okay, then the 60s came along, and of course things changed. Okay, then the country became, in every conceivable way, a multiracial country. All right, it basically became a country of the United States is ultimately a European white country. Okay, I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying it's bad. It's good in some ways, bad in others. Okay, that's fine. But it is, at this point in time, certainly, a racially very complex and very dynamic country. And that's not how it was in the 50s. So back in the 50s, the Republican Party was the Republican Party. It was what it still claims that it is. It was the party that represented the interests of medium and large sized businesses. It was the party that was not so much concerned with rights, or it was concerned with economic rights and with basically making sure that the ledger's balanced at the end of the day. And the Democratic Party tempered all of the Republican Party's concern with economics with concern for human rights, with concern for workers' rights, and so on and so forth. And that's fine, right? Then what happened is, in the 60s, the country became a biracial or multiracial country, and it happened very quickly. So now the people who were enfranchised, who were integrated into the political process during the 60s, were not people who ran companies. They were not people who were making a lot of money, or who, as it turns out, were ever really destined to make a lot of money, or who really ever aspired in any serious way to make a lot of money. And so they became associated with the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party therefore became the white person's party. That is what it became. And that is exactly what it is. That is all that it is. Okay, now, a number of you may at this point dig in your heels. You may say, well, the Republican Party does not represent the interests of white people. It doesn't represent the interests of black people or Hispanic people or anyone other than white people, but it doesn't represent the interests of white people. I agree, that's true, but bear with me. Okay. So the Republican Party became the party of white people. You know it, I know it, black people know it, Hispanic people know it, everybody knows it, right? And that's why no matter how much the Republican Party kowtows to minorities, as they're called, not that they're really minorities anymore, but people of color and non-white people, that's why no matter how much posturing the Republican Party does, these traditionally non-Republican people, blacks, Hispanics, etc., are not going to vote Republican. They will not. And they're right not to, because it's the white person's party. That is what it is. That is all that it is. And that is why poor whites whose economic interests are not by any stretch of the imagination represented by the Republican Party, that is why poor whites vote Republican. Why do they do this? Is it because they're stupid? No, it is not. It is because they know, as everyone else does, that the Republican Party is the white person's party. Okay, it may deny this. It will cloak it with pathetically unconvincing slogans about how it's not the white person's party, it's the party of small government, which is a bald-faced lie, or they'll talk about how it's the party of the Constitution or of universal rights or this or that. But such slogans have no meaning. Nobody really cares about such things. I mean, they do, but not in any relevant way. And that's what's going on. That's why poor whites who don't have 2 cents to rub together, will vote Republican, because it is their party. It may not serve their interests, and they usually know that, but it is their party, and that's why wealthy blacks are probably not going to vote for it. There are some exceptions, but they're exceptions, right? Because it's not their party, even if technically, it serves their financial interests at this or that particular juncture. And they know that, and they're right not to vote for it. And whites are right to vote for it after a fashion. Now, the situation with the Democratic Party is a little more complicated, because the Republican Party used to be the party of economic common sense, and that's not what it is anymore. It became the white party, but it's not allowed to say that, and it's not really allowed to do anything that is consistent with that. So it isn't really anything. And that's why it pursues all of these really, really hollow causes. So Reagan, for whom I have this, and I'm not left-wing, but I have this kind of ineradicable detestation for Reagan. I always did when I was a kid. I hated him, and that hasn't really changed. But, he would talk about, well, I believe in, church and all this nonsense, right? Well, nobody cares about going to church. I mean, nobody. I mean, maybe a few alcoholics who are recovering or whatever might, but not really anybody, okay? And when Republicans talk about church and this and that, these are veiled racial statements, okay? So when Reagan talked about, bringing all of these Dixiecrats into all of these religious people who were then voting Democrat, when he was talking about bringing these people into the Republican fold, he was dog whistling. He was winking and nodding at these were interpreted, as he knew, to have racial meanings, right? He couldn't say that he hated blacks or whatever, and he couldn't say that. So he talked about how he wanted to restore traditional values and do this and restore Christianity. These were veiled ways of winking and saying, yeah, well, look, I have your back, fellow whites. But the problem is that didn't work, right? Because it couldn't possibly work, right? So it ended up backfiring because religious interests are not the interests of Christians are not the interests of white people. The interests of Christians are the interests of Christians, and some Christians are black, some Christians are white, and similarly. So the Republican Party then became the law and order party. They're all about putting people to death and all this, and the reason for that is that the idea is, well, we're going to kill all these, and I'm just being honest. This is what is thought. This is the actual conceit that is operative. The idea is, well, look, who are the people who really commit crimes? It's minorities. So we're going to have this juggernaut prison state and put all these minorities in jail. That's the idea, right? But of course, it backfires. It doesn't work. It's much like the sort of Christian subterfuge. And again, when Republicans talk about family values, that's again another way of talking about. That's another veiled way. It's another borderline politically correct way of signaling to whites that the Republican Party is indeed their party. But of course, it doesn't work, right? Because each of these programs, once it's actually operationalized, each of these programs is quite as much a pro-black program as a pro-white program. The war on drugs employs far more blacks than it does whites, and there are far more per capita. There are far more percentage-wise, far more black police officers than there are white police officers, and similarly, blacks are far more likely to be deeply Christian than whites, dramatically more likely. If you've ever really lived in a black neighborhood or lived among blacks, that you immediately see that. White Christianity is a very pale imitation of, pun intended, I guess, but of black Christianity. So all of these subterfuges didn't work, and they did not deserve to work because they were cowardly and they were also misconceived. They were wrong. It's wrong to advocate mass incarceration and mass executions. It's wrong. Okay, now it may be that you advocate separatism, but if that's what you believe, that's a different thing. You don't implicate the instruments of the legal system to that end. And Christianity is a sort of silly religion. Okay, as everybody knows, there are some very capable people who get something from it, but it is not appropriate to predicate acceptance of. It is not appropriate to bundle reasonable and universally binding moral injunctions with acceptance of some extremely specific and rather curious religious faith. So the Republican Party basically, look, the Republican Party is the white person's party. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows it. Okay? Everybody knows it. The only people who will not say it are Republicans. And so they attempt to do it through these subterfuges, which are increasingly wide of the mark as time passes. Now, the Democratic Party is not simply the black party. Okay? That is one of the things that it is. But the Democratic Party actually does serve a number of functions. It still serves, to some extent, not as much as it used to, but it still serves the interests of workers of all colors. It still does represent the interests of the little guy. It still does more or less, not quite, but more or less what it did in the 50s. And it has more racial meanings now than it used to, but it is still what it used to be. It represented the interests of the little guy 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and that's still what it does. Now, the identity of the little guy has changed a bit, and the little guy's specific needs have changed to some extent, but the Democratic Party is still the Democratic Party. The Republican Party used to be about economics, but then it became the crypto white nationalist party, but at the same time, it was not willing to accept that, so it simply flailed around and became kind of the pro-Wall Street party, which was worthless, and then it became the pro-police state party, which is worthless, and it became the pro-war in the Middle East party, which is worthless. So that is what is going on. Now, Donald Trump is a self-described Republican, and he is a Republican, and he admits that, okay? And the fact that, now, is that good, is that bad? That's not relevant in this context. What is relevant is, here are the three levels of moral being. So here are the three levels of cosmic decency or whatever, okay? So I guess there's being actually good, and there's simply being good. Okay. Now, that's the highest level. The next level. The second level is being something that is not good, but admitting that you are the thing that you are. So not lying about what you are. So the thing you are is not the greatest, but at least you admit it. Then the absolute 1000% lowest, worst level. And the distance between the lowest level and the second level is infinitely greater than the distance between the second level and the first level. The lowest level is to say that you're one thing and to be another. And that's what everybody it's certainly what the Republicans are in this day and age. It is what all self-described liberals are in this day and age. Now, be it noted that it's one thing to be a Democrat, it's a different thing to be a liberal. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but those are distinct things. But so that is what is going on. So that is, for those of you who are not in this country, that is what is going on. And it is deeply and utterly despicable and cowardly of Republicans not to back Trump, because he is simply, he is doing in an honest way what the Republican Party has been doing in a dishonest and radically destructive way. And the thing is that here's another thing, which is that because the Republican Party has not simply admitted that it is the white party, it has done far more damage than it would have had it simply admitted that. Okay, because as a result of its systemic dishonesty, it has to displace all of the things it wanted to do into other things, which turned out to be much larger. So instead of having, separate drinking fountains, now there are these catastrophic wars all over the place, which have no significance for the country, no good significance, and they have obviously very serious bad significance outside of the country. Okay, then there are these ruinous financial policies, and there are these staggeringly destructive, knee-jerk misdeployments of the legal system. And why? Okay, because they simply wanted to maintain respectability. And had they said, well, look, we're white and we don't like people of color and we liked it better the way it was during the segregation days, well, they would have lost respectability. But what would have actually happened? Well, there would have been separate drinking fountains, but there certainly would not have been these displaced endeavors. There wouldn't have been these veiled attempts, these very, very circuitous and hidden under the banner of morality attempts to destroy blacks, right? Okay, because back in the day, back when there was segregation, okay, because white people are as everybody is racist. Okay, white people are racist, black people are racist. But back during the segregation days, racism was overt, so it did not have to assume these. It was relatively overt. It did not have to assume these particularly circuitous forms, right? So there did not have to be a war on drugs because blacks were in one place and whites were in another. But then what happened is then there had to be a war on drugs, and there had to be these absurd policies, and there had to be this revival of the religious right, which is a disgrace, of course. And these things are, and this is the truth of the matter, these things have no appeal and are completely inexplicable except on the assumption that they are displaced attempts to recreate the situation that existed before integration. But the thing is that because they don't deal with the issue directly, because they don't deal with the one issue that they're supposed to deal with, they have to deal with everything else. So instead of doing one little thing, which might be a bad thing or it might be a good thing, but it would be a little thing, instead of doing that one little thing, which would cost them their respectability, they have to do everything else, and they do it badly. And so that's what's going on. So that is the end of it.